Chapter 98, The Offer, Esau's POV. Ever since Hanyu left with their master, Esau had knelt in front of the door and waited. He was much tenser than he had any right to be, but he couldn't help it. Lord Thaddeus was going to be so disappointed when he learned that Hanyu wasn't coming, that he would be alone with Esau. He'd never really offered to teach Esau, only taking him along to be polite. Now Esau was sure to make him regret this undeserved courtesy. When the soft, hesitant knock finally came, he jumped, even though he'd been waiting for it. His hands were shaking as he opened the door. "Hello, Esau," Lord Thaddeus said, beaming. "How are you today?" Something about his face and voice, as always, soothed a knot of tension in Esau's belly. Lord Thaddeus's soft, round body was as different from a war god's physique as could possibly be, even though Esau knew the power hidden beneath that scholarly shape. He was smiling so brightly that his round cheeks almost swallowed his eyes. Even the sight of his fangs, just as sharp and lethal as a Flavia tooth that rested against Esau's chest, not enough to make the expression threatening. And his tone matched his face exactly, pure delight tinging every word, as if there truly were nothing more exciting than a chance to greet a worthless human slave. There were 1,000 reasons to fear Lord Thaddeus, but he made it awfully difficult to remember what they were. Esau dropped right back down to his knees to bow, grudgingly grateful for the pads Lord Julia insisted he wear. The shark tooth popped free of his robe and slapped against his nose as his forehead touched the floor, and he did his best to keep a level voice despite the distractions in his own nerves. "Your servant is well, my lord, and unworthy of your kindness," he murmured. "Oh dear, not at all, not at all. I'm so happy to see you. Please get up." Esau obeyed, surreptitiously stuffing the tooth back into its place. The god's eyes followed his movement. "Oh, you're wearing it! I'm so glad you like it. Do you like it? You don't have to wear it if you don't like it, you know. I won't be offended." Esau had to pause and swallow to keep from blurting out something indecorously enthusiastic. Hanyu was not a good influence on him. "I like it very much, my lord. The earring as well. My lord was so kind to think of me." "Not at all!" Lord Thaddeus's hand started flapping, but his smile and tone stayed bright and easy. "Cloelia thought I should make them a little fancier, said I was shortchanging you. But I thought, well, I hoped you would like the way they are better. Of course, I'm happy to change them if you like." Esau's hand closed protectively over the tooth. "They're perfect, my lord. Thank you." "Oh, good." The god beamed, then glanced around the room. "Where's Hanyu? Antony said you would both be coming with me." Ah, now for the disappointment. Lord Thaddeus was not his master and had no right to discipline him. But even so, Esau's heart sunk right down to the bottom of his gut at the thought of letting him down. "Our master decided to take Hanyu with him," he whispered, bracing himself. "He might join us later. I'm so sorry, my lord." "Just the two of us, then?" Lord Thaddeus asked, and Esau nodded miserably. "How lovely!" It took every bit of Esau's self-control to keep from jerking his head up fast enough to give himself whiplash. When he dared a peek through his lashes, however, he saw that the god looked every bit as delighted as he had sounded. Esau knew better than to speak without permission, but Lord Thaddeus had never been angry with him for doing it before. He felt the tooth, hard and hot against his chest, and decided to risk it. "My lord is not displeased?" he ventured. "Of course not!" Lord Thaddeus cried. "But do you still want to come? I know you never actually asked to learn about fish. You just came along with me and Hanyu to be polite." It didn't matter whether Esau wanted to come or not. He'd been ordered to stay with Lord Thaddeus today, and so he would. Still, when he replied, "I would love to go with you, my lord," he was surprised to find how much he meant it. If Lord Thaddeus truly wanted Esau to be in his wonderful, interesting rooms and listen to his cheerful talk, then Esau wanted that too. His afternoon with the god was the most relaxed he'd felt since he'd left the temple, maybe even longer. Lord Thaddeus smiled. Oh, good! I've never had the chance to talk to you without others around, and it can be so hard to get to know someone when there's a group. Even if it's only Hanyu, he can be a whole group on his own, can't he? Cloelia is just the same. He spoke so fondly that something in Asau's stomach ached a little at the sound of his voice, but then he paused before resuming. Sorry, I don't mean to chatter. Please tell me if I'm boring you. Asau could have listened to those cheerful, unthreatening tones all day. He wouldn't have cared if Lord Thaddeus were talking about dust or taxes. It wasn't boring, it was restful, and it made Asau feel as though he had never truly rested in his life. Not at all, my lord, he assured the god. It's very pleasant. Really? Lord Thaddeus sounded genuinely surprised. Most humans... I'm sorry, I shouldn't generalize. Forgive me. I recently drove off someone I cared about very much by talking too much and not being aware of his feelings. I don't want to do that to you. Asau remembered when Hanyu had told him about Lord Thaddeus and his former attendant. The meek sadness in the god's voice brought an answering angry flare from Asau's stomach. It was different from the anger he'd been feeling lately, the rage that made him lash out at Hanyu when the other man just wanted to help. This anger was simpler, easier. He just wanted to march up to Lord Thaddeus's former attendant and demand to know how the man thought he could possibly do better. Shall we? The god seemed to have rallied, and the smile he offered Asau as he opened the door was genuine enough to soothe both the sudden anger and the last of his tension. He trailed the requisite few steps behind Lord Thaddeus as they traversed the halls, but the god continued talking to him. Asau knew he didn't deserve all this attention, but he couldn't help soaking it up gratefully, especially as they passed his former master's door. His heart pounded as he looked at that familiar entrance. Why? Was he afraid that the door would fly open and Lord Marcus would emerge, or did he want it so badly that the yearning pierced like pain? Asau's desires didn't matter, of course. They never had, but it was so frustrating to not even know what they were. In any event, it didn't happen. He followed Lord Thaddeus right past the door, and it didn't open. Even the deep breath that he allowed himself as it dwindled behind them could have been disappointment or relief, or both. Either way, it left him deeply tired. Lord Thaddeus opened his own door and ushered Asau through with his usual half-bow, half-bob. It was somehow less unnerving without Hanyu there, when Asau could carefully lower his own head and murmur his thanks as he scuttled past, instead of watching his friend and worrying about how he would behave. The god's room seemed to enfold Asau like a soft embrace. Once again, he was reminded of the word that he would now forever associate with this place more than any other: cozy. The books and papers seemed to be in less disarray now, but the heavy shelves and plump chairs and delicate, spindly skeletons still provided so many delightful things to look at. Asau spared a special glance for the jar of teeth, smiling to think that he had two to wear now. He'd been so focused on the sharp ferocity of the jewelry Lord Thaddeus had made for him, it had never even occurred to him to be pleased that he had a piece of these cozy rooms all to himself. I just realized something. The god's voice startled him, but it was too mild and cheerful to prompt any real fear. I never gave you the tour. I'm so sorry, Asau. How rude. Let me show you where everything is. There's not much to see, but you ought to know where to find the chamber pot and all. Asau followed obediently as Lord Thaddeus showed him to a small room that shocked him with its emptiness. Every inch of the sitting room was full, but this room held only a wardrobe, a closed chest, an empty bookshelf, an empty bed frame, and a door. The washroom is through there, the god said, pointing to the door. I've kept soaps and things on hand, but if you ever notice that I'm missing something that ought to be there, I'd be very grateful if you told me. Yes, my lord. When Asau dared to peek at Lord Thaddeus, the god was looking at the barren room with such misery that it hurt just to see him. Sorry to be Malden. Lord Thaddeus shook himself a little. His voice was low, rough, blatantly sad. Asau's heart gave an inappropriate leap when he realized that Lord Thaddeus wasn't trying to disguise his tone or hide his emotions. His face and voice were in perfect agreement with his feelings. Asau wouldn't have to parse or guess. He could just accept. I'm sorry, my lord, he breathed, because really he was horrible for being so delighted by this kindly god's pain. Lord Thaddeus's confused look brought him back to himself with a shock, and he bowed his head to hide his face. I mean, I'm sorry for your loss. You are so kind, Lord Thaddeus sighed. Though I try to think of it as a change, not a loss. Dido never owed me his affection, and he gave me 12 years of it anyway. That's an amazing gift. I miss him, but I don't want to be ungrateful, you know? Esau did not know, and he still felt a little put out. Dido, Hanyu, Lord Theodora's men, some people just didn't seem to understand how wonderful their lives were, and it was infuriating. If my lord will forgive the presumption, I do not think you are ungrateful at all, Esau whispered, shocked at his own daring and the inexcusably harsh, angry note in his voice. Gods, where did all this rage come from? He didn't used to be this angry, did he? Lord Thaddeus was sure to hear it. It would disgust him, this gentle, mild god, and Esau would never be welcome here again. Why couldn't he be sweet and good like he was supposed to? Thank you, Lord Thaddeus said softly. I wanted to offer, and of course you needn't give it a second thought if you'd rather not, of course, but if you ever want it, this room is yours.